Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. It's the blackest hearted, blackest minded, blackest man on social media, signing black in and shining again, asking you to hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. I hope this message benefits and helps out. This one is quite important, even more so than many others, I should say. And this is a continuation of what I uploaded yesterday. There are several things that we need to balance out about how we confront colorism. And I'm speaking to those that are in the so-called golden sphere on one end, and to those that are always telling anybody paler than themselves to check their light-skin privilege. Both. And I'm talking to those who call for a separate categorization, whether you are of more melanin and you feel that, you're tired of lighter skinned black folks having anything and you want them in a separate category, or you are paler and you feel that you are being pushed out or that you've been pushed out and you want a separate category. Or you're tired of whatever the case is. I'm talking to everyone involved in this that said anything about it at any point. The first thing is that both sides of this discussion must avoid using the words all, none, and every last one unless you are discussing a phenomenon for which you are really sure there is no exception. If we're going to generalize, we need to say, I'm generalizing, and not ignoring exceptions, but addressing the rule. We need to say this if we're going to generalize, and even then, that doesn't mean you got to say all. See, usually we like to say all and none and always and never, but we don't want someone to say this regarding us. And the thing is, whenever anyone else does it, whenever anyone says it, the speaker is thinking about the rule, but the listener hears that the speaker means there's no exception. And this right there causes a misunderstanding and unnecessary debate about semantics and generalizations. This will make even intelligent people short-circuit their own wisdom and stop listening. Before you know it, the wise become fools and throw punches like children. Next, light-skinned people in the US, Canada, and the UK know that there is no net light-skin privilege. We must stop accusing darker people of lying about light-skin privilege existing. They're not lying in most cases. They really believe it when they say it most of the time. You see, even many light-skinned black folks believe that there is a net light-skin privilege. Now, we tend to act like, oh, there's no light-skin privilege at all. No, how does it exist but there's no net? Well, it's like having money but you owe more than what you have. Your net wealth is in the negative because of debt. That's what this light-skin privilege is like. It exists in individual circumstances, but the overall net for black folks in the US, Canada, and the UK, from what y'all have been telling me, is that nope, the overall net is a negative. So this is an understanding that it took even me a long time to come to realize. And the thing is, when people talk about light-skin privilege as though it as though it exists in the net form, or as though it outweighs the opposite, that's because internationally that is true. There is such a thing beyond individual instances as a net light-skin privilege. They're talking about that oftentimes. Their mistake is that they think that net light-skin privilege that exists internationally also exists in the US, the UK, and Canada without exception. They're just all over the world, every corner of the globe, no place is ever an exception. That's where they're making this mistake because they really haven't been told about the exceptions. But in the US, Canada, and the UK, there are instances, but the instances of the penalty outweigh the instances of privilege for any complexion in the black community, simply because we are entirely too harsh on each other for any reason. And if someone has an average complexion and they can't be penalized for that socially, then the population becomes harsh on him or her for something else. That's the real problem we have. And this real problem where we're just divisive, period, underlies colorism, classism, featureism, and regionalism. And these things make us suffer internally. But internationally, though, there is a colorism in which the paler craps on the darker, and that's the end of it. That does exist internationally. But we don't give ourselves enough credit in the US and Canada and the UK for having fought it. We have fought it so well that unfortunately, not only I, but others like me have grown up in instances in which if white folks mistreated us, they mistreated everybody, but there were black folks that never mistreated others that would then single us out for mistreatment because, well, I'll explain that phenomena later on. Outside of the three nations in which I mentioned, we can't really blame more abundantly melanated people and unmixed Africans for their distrust of our phenotype. I would completely understand if I was unwelcome in Africa after a certain date. I wouldn't like it, but I would understand it as long as the Europeans and Chinese are even more unwelcome. The problem is that no, they're welcome and I might not be one day. In the US, Canada, and the UK, this international white supremacist colorism has been answered and fought against and resisted, which it should have been. But we have to be aware of whenever we fight against these things. Because when we push the pendulum back, we have to be aware of how far in the other direction it has gone. This is why I will not tolerate being singled out for mistreatment by anyone of any race and will react violently if I cannot escape, especially in the United States. Also in these three nations, lighter-skinned folks came from many times unmixed or more melanated parents, so we don't have the motive to hate our darker relatives. We look at the ones who did treat us better and we wish that they had loved themselves more. So if that grandmom treated us better because we were paler, we simply wish she had loved herself more. We don't look at her and say, oh, I hate that black so-and-so even though she was nice to me and gave me more candy. It doesn't make sense for us to look down on them. In other parts of the Americas, though, yes, when entire families finally did reach complexion uniformity or almost reached that, or we think they did, for a reason I'm not going to go into yet. Even just 2 generations after mixing, it may have been possible for someone to come along and hate those of different shades than oneself, maybe. But the truth is that even there where colorism was different, pro-white and unchallenged, even there families never achieved complexion uniformity to begin with. Remember, Afro-Latino families and Haitian families never had complexion uniformity, and they would tell you that families were divided based on this. You know why? African genes themselves are too diverse. Black people just simply don't have complexion uniformity anywhere in the world. We never did, not even back in Africa, not even in any part of Africa. The Wolof are some of the darkest in Africa, and they don't have all those lovely blurple complexions. Some of them are lighter than others, mistaken for Mandingo, and they never touch bleach. Now with this, and this time I'm saying Mandingo, not Mandingo. I'm talking about the actual Mandinka tribe, or Malinke, they're also called. Now with this in mind, people who say we have light skin privilege really believe it. So we can't say they're lying. Even lighter skinned people who say believe it, not because they think their lives are easy overall, but because they think their lives are just easier than they would have been had they been born darker, that's all. There was a time I would have believed that. They assumed that the difficulties of life would increase and there would be no offset for this in America or Canada or the UK if they were darker. Let's not blame them for thinking this right off the bat. Because see, everyone that believes this, like I did at one point, has heard all shades of people confirm it, so they really don't know. Had I not analyzed it, I would not have realized it myself, that in those three nations, the black community made sure that any ease any one of us might get from elders or from our own or from non-blacks is more than paid for in suffering. Because think about it. Imagine you and your homeboys get picked up and you really don't know why you all got picked up. So you don't know what the detectives are talking about in the questioning room. Eventually they come to realize, you know what? He actually didn't know anything. They let you go and your homeboys are staying inside. The rest of the community sees you as a rat, not somebody that didn't know what's going on, but as a rat right off the bat. That's because whatever you don't suffer, we turn around and make you suffer because we have in our minds, as black folks, period, of any shade, that we were born to suffer. As an African American Muslim, there were people that when I got to be 35 and 36 and 37, there were some other guys that stopped trusting me because I had all my teeth left. They weren't used to African Americans that became Muslim somewhere other than prison, after having lost teeth and knocked out other people's teeth in fights. They couldn't see that. Why did I have all my teeth and no scars? And why did I become Muslim outside of incarceration? I must be a spy. Now, they never got in my face about it. They just started keeping a distance and even moving away when they would see me and they didn't know I saw them. And this was rare, but it did happen. But this is why we must recognize that light skin privilege is not made up. It is confused in the three nations with the international version that is the rule, whereas the three nations are the exception. That's what we have to understand. They ain't lying about it. They're not lying. And on the flip side, when you say, check your privilege, we had light skin privilege, and we tell you, no, as a net, we didn't have it. We need to realize that there are individual instances of it, and we may not know every single instance, but what we're telling you is that there is no net because the community does not allow that. If they did for my parents' generation, they damn sure ain't going to allow that for mine. Absolutely not. And individual instances, you are confusing with a net result and overarching pattern. And the international pattern is assumed to be the case in the three nations that I mentioned when it's not been that way for a while. See, the previous generation, I'm sure they had that light skin privilege because they all said they had it. I mean, they all said it existed. Not that everyone had it, but they all said it existed. But even then, there was a pushback. It just was not overarching. It didn't win. See, my mother in college was not allowed to say certain things about what black folks would need to improve. But her roommate was. And she straight up questioned it at some point. And their mutual friend said, well, she's much bigger and blacker than you are. That's why she can say it, but you can't. And my mother's been fighting black folks ever since. But since it has been challenged in 1989, its net value has been negative because we made sure of it after that point. Now, Sergeant Willie Pete said that among whites, we're still the N-word, and this is true. But it is our own race that insists that there will not be any net light-skin privilege. And this is the community to which light-skinned and admixed folks cling in the three nations I mentioned. We go by the one-drop rule in general. You got black blood, you're black. And we cling to that. We don't mind it. I don't mind it, although I have more than a drop. I'm mostly black, at least from what I've been told. So I don't mind it, I cling to it, but the same community has made sure there will not be any net light skin privilege at the end of the day. If there is any instance, another instance must manifest to cancel it out, and it does. See, I noticed as a youngster, like I said, the white folks I saw that would mistreat me would do it to anybody. The only time I was ever singled out for mistreatment was by us. Imagine being singled out by somebody that's never been hostile to anybody else, never done anything mean to anybody else, sees you and wants to get confrontational, and you don't know what it's about. Now, it's not just me, because in my case, I dealt with it. But imagine someone else doesn't know what it's about. They go through this their whole childhood, and they're told you ain't nobody special, ain't nobody tripping off you, ain't nobody stunting you because of that. You must have done or said something. And then they get older and they realize as adults, no, that's exactly what the fuck it was. See, it's not like in other nations in which such people have been classified separately and agreed to the category. Like what happened in Brazil, Costa Rica, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Puerto Rico. And I'm going to get to them, Martinique. I'm going to get to them in a bit, towards the end. But look, see, in the States, I never heard a light-skinned black person called to be categorized separately until after hearing some say that we weren't black or that we were worse than white supremacists. And even Omar Johnson and Ayo Kimathi once said that there will come a day that black folks will be meaner to mulattoes more than they had ever hated white folks. I remember hearing them say this back in 2012, but those were videos that were old even back then. So no, all of what I've told you is new information even to me. But those who scream light-skin privilege really think it's there after all the tabulations are made. So they're not lying, they really think so. And those of you that are saying that, you are right that individual instances exist, so you're not making those things up, but where you're not listening is when we tell you that the penalty outweighs the instances of privilege. The penalty is a goddamn pattern. The instances were instances, few and far between. A lot of people in my generation grew up where there might have been some of this in early childhood when we were too young to know what was going on. But then later on, second half of childhood, we spent that paying for the little instances of privilege when we were younger and didn't know why we had to pay. Another imbalance we have to correct is this idea that Black Lives Matter as a movement. I don't mean the organization. Jump on them all you want, please do. But there's this idea that Black Lives Matter as a movement is just for the thugs in the community to get away with being that way. It's not. What it is that when black people hurt each other, we go to jail if the crime is solved. When a cop shoots one of us, they have a high chance of not going to jail. And if a black cop shoots a white suspect, she or he is in so much trouble for it, like Stafford in Louisiana and Mohammed Noor in Minnesota. You don't get away with that mess. You see how that works? When can a black cop shoot an unarmed white suspect for resisting and stay free and acquitted? That's why there's a Black Lives Matter movement at this point. That's why you've got the protesting, not the looting. The looters have already been caught. A lot of them are Antifa and somebody else trying to set up anarchy. No, the looters have been caught in many cases. But the protesting is based on the fact that if you are a white cop, you got a high chance of getting away with it. And that, yes, we die in smaller numbers than whites, but we make up smaller numbers than whites. We still die disproportionately while being unarmed. So that's why there is that. If white unarmed suspects are getting shot by black officers and resisting arrest, it's a well-kept secret. And if that does exist, that would beg the question, why is it so well kept a secret? But, it hasn't leaked out, so I don't know that this, as far as anyone I know knows, that's not what's going on. So black people don't not care if we hurt each other. We just don't expect it to go unpunished if it can be solved. That's the difference. Cop can kill you on camera, walk the F off and get away with it. That's why there's a BLM. The other thing, too, is that most of us tend to respond to whatever information is available. George Floyd's case is available. You hear about it. It's international. They're asking me about it over here in Arabic. But other cases aren't necessarily publicized as much, and we may really not know. Another imbalance that needs to be corrected is the militant light-skinned warrior. Now, I don't mean the one that sticks up for lighter-skinned folks and the right to not be singled out for mistreatment, verbal or physical. The ones that stand against that, they got 200% of my support. Because I myself believe in being militant. But the imbalance is the one that's ready to answer the slights against light-skinned black folks with assault rifles and bullets and ain't even got no smoke for Caucasians and white supremacists. No smoke for them. And will even repeat their talking points like Doja Cat. She repeated white supremacist talking points on social media. This is why people want for her. Don't defend someone like her. Are you kidding me? See, that militant light-skinned warrior, and I mean specifically the one that wants to go after other black folks with assault rifles and bullets, is the imbalance I'm talking about, not the one that believes in self-defense. But see, most black folks of any shade, especially adults, are not ready to discriminate against other black folks based on complexion, let alone commit violence, so there's not really a need for this. And so these the ones that are ready to go and actually, shoot other black folks, give a bad name to folks who may just want a separate legal category for light-skinned and mixed people. Now, I don't call for a separate category, but I hear those who do, and they're not trying to raise an army to go out and avenge every childhood act of bullying of a light-skinned person. On the flip side, I want so-called golden folks, meaning lighter skin or mixed folks, I want those who track violent acts in which the victim is light-skinned or mixed to remember that we have to prove which acts are based on either one's color. We have to prove this to be the case before we simply say that somebody is so-and-so is being attacked for being light-skinned. Now, that's a hard thing to prove. It was hard for me to prove coming up. But before we go and react, we do want to know that that's what it's about. You see, usually men who fetishize light-skinned women and then hit them or kill them would do it to any woman in reality, usually. So in childhood, though, yes, I witnessed that light-skinned guys and very dark or very light-skinned girls were likely to be victims of childhood violence. And actually, you know what I witnessed was light-skinned guys could be victims of acts of bullying. I had to hear about light-skinned girls going through this later on. I believe it. I didn't witness it coming up, so I didn't know. But this is almost non-existent in adulthood. And if it does happen, it's in the hood where violence would happen to any adult, period. So in those rare instances in which an adult will fight you because of your shade, no matter what it is, kill them to protect yourself. That's when it's time to be that light-skinned warrior. And conversely, if someone was subject to violence by anybody else because that person was dark, then it's time for that individual to become a dark-skinned warrior. But that's because either one was forced to. Although the second scenario is damn near non-existent within our community and suicidal, to be honest. Second scenario usually happens when it's a white supremacist going after somebody black. Physical militancy should be saved for the necessity of physical self-defense. And frankly, this is something usually sorted out in childhood. Should we teach the kids self-defense? Absolutely, yes. I mean, knowing what I know now, yes, light-skinned girls and light-skinned boys need to be taught self-defense at a young age. But I wasn't aware of this and how much for a long time. However, this is for childhood. In adulthood, people fight differently, usually. Another thing that we need to fix, all shades, something to black folks, all shades must cease, is to associate the black community with others' negative stereotypes of it. See, I've heard black folk of all shades talk about the community like it's only the futhermucking hood. No, that's not the case. Now, in many cases, it is because of systemic impoverishment. That's what white supremacy does. But there do exist Prince George County and Cascade type neighborhoods in a few places. And these are black middle class and upper class enclaves of black America. And my neighborhood was one such place eventually. Honestly, the best place to grow up as a black person of any phenotype is a quiet black neighborhood. Whether it's rich or not, a quiet black neighborhood is the best one to grow up in. But when we let not only the poorest have a monopoly on speaking for us, but add to that letting them limit this monopoly further to the most intentionally dysfunctional, negatively stereotypical ignorant of us, the most IDNS of us, then of course we will be divided based on who believes in the worst behaved sole legitimacy to speak for us, and those who then believe in the opposite as a backlash. That because they have a voice at all, the rest of the black population is really inferior to every other population. And these two extremes will again, like we see happen to our people all the time, divide us into camps that will wipe out the middle over some unnecessary dichotomy between two falsehoods. No. You don't give the absolute most negatively stereotypical of us the voice in representing us and speaking for us with some sort of authenticity and authority. And on the flip side, the fact that this does exist in certain subconscious chambers of our minds does not mean that we are inferior, because in all honesty, let's call it what it is. Do you think that in Italian neighborhoods in New York, they didn't mind the mob speaking for them? Oh, they glorified their own mob. The hell you think the mafia movies of the late 80s and early 90s were about, while they were beginning to get arrested and flip on each other and break the code of omertà, which meant the code of silence. Started dropping like dominoes. They were being glorified. Previously, they would have been denied to have existed. So we're not, on one hand, inferior to everybody else, and on the other hand, we're not supposed to be giving the legitimacy and authority to speak for us and represent us to the most negatively stereotypical. And that's, to a certain extent, that's what we did. And a lot of us didn't do that. That's the sad thing about it. Now, in the golden sphere, there are many who think that the rest of the black community is some cesspool. And outside of the golden sphere, even just among many black folks, failing to realize that the black upper class and middle class communities are actually fertile ground for what we really would seek in the first place, which is safe places to grow up black of any phenotype, provided that we keep the kids from these neighborhoods out of the mindset that they're less black. This was a failure on the part of the elders. Because the elders that were in these neighborhoods left behind would tell their kids, well, you know, your cousin from that swanky neighborhood think he better than you. I mean, yeah, his brother's my sister, but he think he better than you. There ain't no real niggas like us. They did say this. And these cousins, we experienced this. Some of us were those cousins. Others of us had those cousins. That hurt people of my neighborhood, and the story behind that's quite amusing but sad, but the short version of it is that you had a dumb child of Hoteps living in our neighborhood. Actually, he was a dumb child of Noteps. And I see why others in the conscious community did not associate with them often. But you had this dumb child of Noteps, and he lived next to a mulatto boy, and he would put this mulatto boy on guilt trips all of the time, goading him to eventually in his teens become a burglar, who later on burgled the wrong house, got surprised the person was still home, and then killed him. And the Noteps kid wound up murdering a woman that tried to break up with him and going to prison. They both are now in the same prison at this point, probably neighbors again on the cell block. And yes, both of them are in prison behind women, because the Notep, who thought his blackness was legitimized by a street demeanor, I don't know how he didn't learn better than that from his parents, killed and burned a woman in a car, wound up in prison for that. And the mulatto kid that he guilt-tripped into an ignorant, idleness way of life was ratted out by his own lady friend because he picked a ratchet, to legitimize his blackness. He picked a ratchet. And when she got caught shoplifting to get some stuff that she had gotten used to him stealing for her, she then turned around and flipped on him to get herself off the hook for that murder. The burglary turned murder, she told on him for it because she didn't want to do time for shoplifting. Both of them believed that blackness was legitimized by negative stereotypes, and they grew up in a nice neighborhood. So neither one is really exempt from this, and that's why we got to avoid these extremes. Ironically, both of them started off on opposing extremes of this colorism argument amongst our population, and they were just kids. They were having this problem between themselves when they were in second grade. We don't need to accept this mindset of the definition of blackness, and for either of us to do so is detrimental. Secondly, both of us need to keep in mind that if indeed light-skinned and mixed people were to go into a separate category, that category would then fragment even further, which is what a common enemy wants and has done in other countries. See, think about the caste system. It is complex, so many different castes. Do you think they started off that way? Oh no, it had to evolve over time. I'm sure it started off as just Aryans and Dravidians. Look now what you have. No, it probably started off with 3, Aryans, Dravidians, and their admixture. Then they said, we got to stop this stuff, and so it evolved. The only thing the Aryans cared about was they didn't disappear to the Dravidians. So you keep the admixed and the Dravidians separate, but then you probably have the admixed saying, well, you know what, we don't want to be with the Dravidians, and the Dravidians probably said we can't trust them, and so then class and language and everything else became a part of it, and before you know it, you don't know what part of India somebody's from without just by looking or even by listening to them, to their accents. They sound the same to us, but they're so divided between themselves. And yet we look up to them like some solid one community on code. No, they're not. They're just on code against your high melanin count. And many people in India are not with that mess, but they're poor and they don't make it out the country. That's another topic for another day. Torch Blazed covered that. Point is, it started out with just, 2 groups and an admixture in between them, and one group didn't want to disappear. Now today, we've got a religion with a caste system encoded in it that is so complex, and 3 million gods. Those of us who are mixed between white and black aren't going to understand those who are mixed black and something else. Those of us that are mixed between black and something else aren't necessarily going to understand those that are mixed between 2 non-black groups. Those who are simply light-skinned but with a West African phenotype will be different from those that are light-skinned with an East African phenotype. And truth be told, this is already happening among some of our race that have enough or abundant melanin. See, my wife, who's dark brown, was approached by some tropical-looking African-American women in the U.S., and they fussed at her for having white hair. And I'm using air quotes for white hair. It was funny because I can tell the difference between her hair and Caucasian's hair with my eyes closed. But they got on her for having white hair. See, this is fragmenting. But this fragmenting is only necessary if someone makes it necessary, meaning someone insists and expels you. We're not going through this. If the black populations, I'm sorry, because some of y'all don't want me calling us a community, but if the black population or community's majority isn't calling for this, then how do we draw the line on something that hasn't been unanimously defined by who is imagined to be calling for it when they're not even calling for it? In actuality, no, this fragmenting being called for is not what we think. It's actually another way to divide black families, which is what apartheid did in South Africa when people were categorized first. Then they were not allowed to live with anyone of another category. Siblings were separated in childhood from each other, and some from their parents, never allowed to live together again because of it. I don't want this to happen again anywhere, to anyone. Hell, I don't even wish this on white people, and you know I don't apologize for going against them even having equality with anyone darker than themselves, not because of their color or their DNA, but because of what they've done. And because of them, we even have to have these conversations about colorism, including my recording right now. No, make no bones about it. Indians may have gotten that from Afghans, but we got that from white folks. It's because of them I got to record this. So I don't apologize for how I go in on them as a society, even while I take every individual on an individual basis and treat them fairly. A separate category and separate community means I have to live away from relatives and we're both black. You got to live away from relatives and you're both black. Or one of you just more mixed than the other. Or one of you's mixed and unrecognizable as mixed, and the other one is maybe unmixed but light-skinned enough to be mistaken for mixed. You see where this goes? And my relatives never drove me out, even when I became Muslim, so why would I call for me to be forced to never live with them again because of white folks' obsession with human skin color? Genetically, we are a variety of black people, and we can't change that, and we shouldn't want to. That's genetically speaking. We must also remember that our race has not only always been diverse in shade and head texture and overall phenotype, and this is a genetic fact and not some hotep rhetoric either. But that we're not just Americans and British. Also, many of us can go to various parts of Africa, and they won't mind living with us and identifying, or us identifying ourselves as the same race, even if a different tribe. Really depends on which part you go to be honest. In Liberia, I would be accepted as a Vi, but I look like Caesar Cannon or Vin Diesel or some cross between them without the muscles. But there's a tribe in Liberia called the Vi that I could pass as. And this is Liberia, the same country from which the Loma people come, and they're not only black, but they're blurple. The Vi apparently came from a higher elevation where the weather was a little bit different. Not because they were further from the equator, but because they were further above sea level. And they've always been every shade without admixture from whites or Arabs. So some might say, well, the Vi are Muslims, so that means they got that Arab blood. No, being Muslim doesn't make you have Arab blood, first off. And secondly, remember, the Arabs who come from black people themselves would never marry unmixed black folks. I mean, there are individual cases, but usually they don't. There was one Arab community that managed to settle in West Africa, and they lost their religion and their culture and their language, but they remained racially distinct for centuries in that part of Africa. They were known for not marrying others. Non-black Arabs, even though they got black ancestry, don't want to get blacker again. And that's one thing they'll hold on to for centuries. When nothing else is there, they will have held on to that. That's why you've got half Lebanese in Africa, but you also have Lebanese women that ain't marrying no non-Lebanese men. And that's why you still have a distinct non-black Lebanese community in West Africa and even Central Africa to this further mucking day. And some of them can't speak a lick of Arabic. But anyway, what I want to point out is that the reason for all of this, and even the existence of the Arabs in the first place, let alone whites, is because there can't be a genetic separation between the complexions of black people because lighter colors come from black Africans anyway, and it's still happening now as we speak. So the separation really could not possibly be maintained except artificially. And what this means is that paler complexions and even other phenotypes cannot be removed from the wider black population, and they never could be. If we tried right now, what would happen to a black couple that had a child with a mutation for blue eyes and showed the trait? It's already happened 4 times in the past 15 years in West Africa alone, as far as I know. What if there are other cases I don't know about? And apparently these traits, these 4 have a dominant mutation. That means that the blue-eyed gene in them is dominant, not recessive like the one in the Europeans. That's what it means. So if that happens, does that child with every African trait except for blue eyes have to leave his or her parents and live with us? Go and move to the other community? What happens if a West African has a child with a black Solomon Islander and the child inherits the Solomon Islanders' allele for blonde hair that's actually not recessive to the allele for black hair, and so the child shows blonde hair? Everything else about him is unquestionably black. Does that child have to leave the parents and be adopted by a light-skinned black, biracial, not black enough couple? So what I'm saying is that we can't actually practically pull this separation off, especially with the knowledge of DNA that people have today. Did they try this in other countries? Yes, we talk about these other countries, and it led to confusion. And I'm going to talk about that confusion before I close out. But anyway, we have every right to refuse to be singled out for mistreatment, and we even have an obligation to resist that, just as our entire race has every need and obligation to refuse to be singled out by other races for mistreatment and less respect. But while we do have to have our own separate from other races until they can learn that we're actually superior to them simply because we didn't do to them what they did to us or cheered whites doing to us, we still have to admit that these entirely different races came from us. And they're related to us as descendants, even after they lost the ability to pass on specifically our traits to their own kids. They're still our descendants. They just don't know how to act like it. That's all that is. We have to admit that even those conflicts are conflicts between relatives. How much so would a division, especially one in which conflict is always being discussed, be one between relatives within our race? See, some of these other people had colorism before they even met Europeans. And these are relatives of ours. We just can't live with them. These are our own grandkids, but we can't unite with them because they've refused it. But we don't need to take on their own views of our diversity and internalize them and then fragment ourselves further, especially just because two ladies from some controversial and irritating culture within their own parents' country decided to talk about the issue of colorism in a manner that even we African Americans or even other Nigerian tribes next to theirs would have never discussed it. Yeah, I said it. Granted, there is gaslighting that goes on, often aimed at paler black folks, not being done by pale black folks, but aimed at them. And for this reason, Brown and Beige Community, the YouTuber, has to call out the gaslighters on the basis of the gaslighting, not their shade. This gaslighting comes when a paler black person says anything about colorism. So someone my shade says, yeah, the white folks, I'm still a nigga. And we get the reply, but you're more acceptable to them and acknowledge your privilege. Or we say, I acknowledge my privilege and accept that whites and blacks have been easier on me, while really believing that and not lying, only to be told in response, but you still a nigga, no, you ain't no better than me. So yeah, this gaslighting does happen. Whatever you say, they argue. Yeah, I identify myself as what I am, African American. No, nigga, you ain't. Okay, you know what? I've actually told some people before that I was from another country just to see what would happen, then let them find out I was black. Oh, nigga, you lying. See, you got that inferiority complex. We always trying to be something else. And you, see, I've tried both, and it doesn't matter what the hell I say. And other people have gone through this too. Doesn't matter what you say. So this type of gaslighting, it does happen. And that's why I didn't jump on Brown and Beige Community even when I disagreed. He's right about this gaslighting being a damn problem, and it's enough to drive anybody away from whoever does the gaslighting. But we aren't capable of being a separate race or community, and attempts to be recategorized like in Brazil and other countries that I mentioned, and other parts of the Americas, would only lead to confusion, and I talked about that. I said I was going to tell you about the confusion. Here it goes. Right now, Brazilians who have any black blood are reacting to this confusion that's been going on for centuries by recategorizing themselves as black without extra explanations. Since many of our genes are actually dominant anyway, the ones that used to have all of these other names, I mean black folks that used to have all these other names, Moreno, Mulatto, Bruno, anything else, now they're saying if we have to discuss it and ask, we're black. If it's a discussion, we're black. If one parent is black, we're black. Now, my brother and my cousin witnessed this themselves with their own eyes and ears when they were in Brazil and then in Costa Rica. And I saw the African Festival Day in Limon, Costa Rica, and many of them today would have been told they're not black enough, especially by those two Igbo shit talkers that we thought were African Americans. And I don't have any problem with other black folks globally. I'm sitting up here saying that we could live with them, actually. But we do have to admit there is a particular culture in the black world that is it's fucking it up for everybody else. And that's them Igbo Lagos area niggas, trash talking. They even make other Igbos with a rational mind sick with their trash talking. So how you think they make other Nigerians of other tribes feel? They're the ones that really gave their countrymen a bad name in South Africa and Kenya and these other places. There's a reason that people get sick of these Lagos area niggas. They just don't know that it's Lagos and Igbo shit talkers. They think it's just Nigerians, and then Nigerians are getting beat up for things they never did. But there is a particular culture that even other Nigerians have told me is a shit talking, trash talking culture. Yeah, it's the Igbo. Even some of the Igbo told me this. That's how I know. So we got these two ladies that never bothered to tell us, my parents are from a particular country and a particular tribe within that country that's known for talking shit. So we are the shit talkingest of the shit talking black folks in the world, and we're going to cause some division. They didn't have the decency to tell us that. So ironically, their people aren't the darkest in the world anymore, anywhere. So why are we taking this calling for a division that most of our more melanated kinfolks aren't asking for? And it's only really you can trace it back to these two. We do need to oppose this colorism in the families, most of which is coming from the gynocracy. But in reality, it's not pitting a majority of us against each other, especially as adults. And it doesn't yet warrant another category and separate community we couldn't properly demarcate if we even wanted to. Most of us of any shade find colorism to be too stupid for us to internalize ourselves. So why don't we collectively oppose it instead of demarcating some boundary we'll never find, let alone agree on, and that would really split up existing families, black families, more than now, like it split up black families in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Brazil. Let's utilize the division that's already there. This division is between those of us that are adults and we're not self-destructive colorist children going in either direction, anti-light or anti-dark. And on the opposite end are those of us that are self-destructive, self-divisive, rat bastard children that ultimately serve white supremacist interests, whether they are anti-dark or anti-light, doesn't matter. See, this way we can wipe out the self-destructive, self-divisive, rat bastard kids instead of dividing our people up the way that they and their white supremacist masters would want us to, even if they think they're the ones opposing white supremacy by being anti-light skin. Most of the colorism arguments in adulthood come down to who gets chosen by the opposite gender anyway. And if this is not a worthy topic to discuss so much, then it's not a worthy topic over which to divide an already victimized and exploited population that cannot afford any more internal divisions. That's what I'm getting at. Everybody, every last one of you, whatever your shade is, protect yourself from these overgrown rat bastard kids. Because whichever side they say they're on, they're really serving our enemies. And some of you are going to say, so you're telling me that my white parent is our enemy? See, again, I just said that I take whites as individuals on an individual basis, but their society is. And if you don't believe me, ask them how other white people treated them when they got with your black parent, and that'll tell you. And some of you say, well, my black relatives got on my black parent a lot more than my white relatives got on my white parent. That's an individual case. And frankly, to tell the truth, even if that is the case, that was a reaction. Let's be honest. We did not start racism and we did not start colorism. That's part of the reason why we are so blindsided by it now. So all that being said, thank you for listening. I've gone a long time. I realize it. And I appreciate that. I really hope to Allah that one day this recording will not be necessary anymore. Until that day comes, may Allah put benefit in it for you and for me, aside from me swearing, for which I seek his forgiveness. All the mistakes have been mine, and everything true I've said has come from his wisdom. Black heart, black mind, black out, assalamu alaikum, and black heterosexual non-select male power, just because the gynocracy and white supremacy don't like it.